All right. Hello and welcome everyone to a KULLERVO builds refresh. So, a lot to talk about with KULLERVO. Honestly, the main reason that he is getting a builds refresh is because his last builds video talked about a lot of problems that he had at the time. And now those problems are all fixed. So, he's great now. And for that, his build hasn't changed particularly a lot. But we're going to go over quite a few things with this because anyone who caught my most recent free-to-play through knows that I basically rushed KULLERVO and then crushed the whole game with him because he is fantastic for new players, so we have a few things to go over. Starting with, the first and foremost, for those of you that hate Helminth and don't like subsuming things, I don't on him. His abilities are all so individually good and useful that if you replace any of them, you lose something. It's not that you can't replace some of them. You could theoretically replace Collective Curse in favor of, like, Gloom if you want to slow. Or if you want, like, the viral damage, you could put Nourish here. You could add Roar. Roar is really good for farming with Storm of Ukko. It's better than Collective Curse in some cases, especially if you don't want to have to cast Curse all the time. There's a bunch of options that you can go for with KULLERVO. Not that he needs any of them in order to perform exceedingly well. And most of the time, like, I just really don't find a need for any of them in any case, because they're just not really a power increase. They're kind of all just side grades for him almost all of the time. In terms of the build that we are using, this is what I have settled on. There are things in here that are optional. You can see I have futzed around with the polarities a bit. Something's on a wrong polarity, and things are moved around a bit. First and foremost, the primary thing here is that we are on the Umbral mods. So, in the past, well, on his initial release, more like, I needed all of the Umbral mods, Vitality, Intensify, and Fiber, just in order to survive. It is very worth noting that now that his 2 has received survivability changes, where it has, like, a better cap, and also Overguard itself is just more impactful and better for surviving now, you do not need Umbral Fiber. That means a couple of things. Not needing Umbral Fiber means that you can run an unranked version if you just want the strength and the health that you will get from an unranked copy of Umbral Fiber, which you can get from Samaris. So that means that this is just a 6-cost, really easy-to-use mod for your build that really cheapens the build quite heavily. So that is a fantastic option for people who are newer players and just don't want to, form out a non-prime Warframe or whatnot. And then in addition to that, this can be swapped out with, like, so many different mods. Energy Nexus for energy economy, Hunter Adrenaline for energy economy. You could swap it in with Rolling Guard if you feel like you need that. Adaptation is a reasonable option that also is sometimes in this slot. You could do more strength in that slot, especially if you don't have Molt Augmented. You could there's a lot. There's a lot of things that this slot can be. It really is just like a true flex slot. Whenever we get well, it's not even, the button's not even here. Whenever we get augments for KULLERVO, it might be a slot for that, depending on if the augments are good or not, which I look forward to in the future. But basically, you don't have to run Umbral Fiber. I do really like Umbral Intensify and Umbral Vitality on him, and we're pretty much not going to remove those ever. But Umbral Fiber, this could be a number of different things based on entirely taste. Other than that, we are notably running Stretch, Overextended, and Cunning Drift for a massive 250% range. That is, meaning that another one of these things that you could instead do is, instead of Umbral Fiber, you could run Augur Reach to completely max out your ability range, which in some cases might be useful depending on the tile sets that you are playing. But mostly that is for coverage with Storm of Ukko. This is a gigantic 25-meter radius with this build, and it will pretty much solve most levels of content. You can farm ESO with this. You can farm, anything in the regular star chart gets farmed by Storm of Ukko with this much range and this much strength. No problem. In Steel Path, this will basically kill all of, like, the small enemies without you really doing much. You can use this on, like, your weeklies going into, like, the Archon, if it's, like, Interception or this, that, and the other thing. Like, there's so many things where you just, like, drop Storm of Ukko, and then all of the little enemies that appear, they don't appear anymore. You stop seeing them. They do not enter your vicinity because they are dying to Raining Daggers. And that is, of course, really good. In addition, of course, Storm of Ukko with more range combines even better with Collective Curse. This chains all the enemies together and they share damage. This is the reason why we are running Molt Augmented, notably, because from the 147 that we're at after our shards that we have installed on KULLERVO, plus that 60% gets us to the damage redirection going up above 100%. So that means that all enemies are going to share 100% of the damage that they are going to be taking. basically meaning that every single enemy that's being hit by Storm of Ukko is being hit for as many times as all of the enemies that are in Storm of Ukko that are chained. To put that simply, if 2 enemies are chained, they take double damage. 3 enemies, they all take triple. 4 enemies, they all take quadruple, so on and so forth. Extremely good slash scaling. This, of course, is also not just limited to your abilities and is fantastic when used with Wrathful Advance in order to do like gigantic heavy attacks that kill everyone chained together. And of course is even kind of good at low levels with Recompense, but mostly that's not going to come up. So basically, we're on a good amount of duration so that Storm of Ukko stays up for a while and we get to have our Wrathful Advance buff for a while. We're on enough strength to pretty much exactly keep Molt augmented at our 200% range for Collective Curse, although you don't need 100% damage redirection. I just like to be there. And then, of course, that strength is also useful for Storm of Ukko, just killing everything. And then efficiency-wise, there's a lot of options. So instead of Streamline, Energy Nexus, you can run... You can run pretty much like whatever. Your Equilibrium is an option in this slot. You can definitely do that here. Primed Flow, I'm going to say that most people are going to run this because of a thing we're going to talk about in a moment. But Primed Flow is also optional. You could go Streamline, Energy Nexus. That's probably fine. There's just a number of different things that you can do. Prime Flow, though, I have come to really enjoy in this for a number of different reasons. For that lets us talk about the shards. So, shard-wise, what I have in him, obviously there's some Taus in here. We have 2 Strength Taus, and I have 1 Parkour Velocity Tau. Parkour Velocity is entirely to taste. He does not need it, but I like going fast. And these 2 Strengths, these, I mean, you could just do 3 of these if you wanted to get, like, the exact same amount of strength that I have. Like I said, I do like to be at 200% strength, but he by no means needs it. If you didn't have any of these shards, you would not notice a single difference. Similarly, these are the 2 blue shards that I've had in him for quite a long time. So I used to not run Primed Flow, and I was running these 2 regular blue shards in their stead, or in its stead, rather. And these were just like a nice extra buffer of energy. That being said, because I run Primed Flow now, these are basically doing absolutely nothing in this build. So you could completely forego shards if you wanted to, and there's really not going to be any difference in terms of his overall performance until you get to like exceedingly high level enemies, and that's going to be pretty unusual. That being said, if you want to go stupid KULLERVO investment, instead of these 2 blue shards, you could include 2 purple Tau shards. So the purple Tau shards require you to have over 500 energy base, which with Primed Flow is the case, and they give you a gigantic increase to critical damage. And because Wrathful Advance, of course, gives you all of the crit you'll ever need for your melee, getting all of the crit damage you'll ever need from 2 purple Tau shards means that you can just hit enemies into, like, just send them straight to the Shadow Realm. They do not like it. But that investment is also not necessary at all, and I didn't want to have that installed here because we're going to be showing the new player build, because this build, while all fine and good and expensive and wonderful, and I love using it, and I use it very often, also, because I didn't mention, Arcane Blessing, totally optional here. I mostly just think it's funny. Put whatever you want here. There's a bunch of melee arcanes, like things to taste, Reaper, all kinds of stuff. I think Blessing is funny, and he doesn't really need his second arcane slot, but Blessing is funny. So all this stuff, all this expensive, like these arcanes, all this nonsense, all this, like, max range, all this stuff, all of this is fine and dandy and cute. But if you want to do Steel Path, you don't need all this. You need about this. And you might be thinking to yourself, Brozime, is that even a build? Don't 4 of those mods come from the tutorial? Like, isn't the only 2 mods on that entire build that don't come out of the tutorial Energy Siphon, which you just have to wait for a little bit on the Nightwave and don't even need it, and then Hunter Adrenaline, which comes from an event that runs basically bi-weekly at worst and is common? Yes. Also, Mr. Brozime, doesn't this build not need a reactor for KULLERVO? Or Forma, for that matter? You need neither of those 2 things in order to put this build together? Yes, that is also correct. This is poverty, KULLERVO. If you are a brand new player, you can do better than this. I assure you, especially if you are following my free-to-play through. But if you've gotten yourself into some kind of bad position where you have no Forma, no reactors, no nothing, you can use this, and this build can do Steel Path when paired with the weapon that you kind of can't get, or can't not get while you're farming KULLERVO, which is the Azathane. The Azathane is a fantastic weapon for him that I use even for like his kind of endgame varietals, though there are some arguable better upgrades to it, such as, of course, Ceramic Dagger. But I personally really like the Azathane because of its heavy motion and the amount of range that it has. And the build for that, for like kind of top end, is basically this. You could invest theoretically one more Forma in order to put in Dreamer's Wrath for the extra heavy attack critical damage, and then replace Mentor's Legacy. But this I've really honestly been happy with. With the addition of melee exposure, I actually dropped an elemental I used to run here. I just run toxin damage now because that just ignores shields and will kill a lot of enemies right off the rip, which is very nice. And then melee exposure gives me corrosive damage for any of my like elemental upfront damage needs for other enemies. And then, of course, Gladiator Might is the additional critical damage beyond Amalgam Organ Shatter. Speaking of Amalgam Organ Shatter, I know a lot of people don't have this one. You can just use regular. KULLERVO already has enhanced heavy attack speed, so you're almost never going to notice a difference at all between the regular one and this one, and the regular one actually has higher damage numbers, so you don't need to have the Amalgam for this. But speaking of things you don't need, the new player version of this build is this. Now, this has 3 super basic mods that you're almost certainly going to run into. It has Vicious Frost, which comes from Spies, which can be a little bit of a farm to get, and then Virulent Scourge, which comes from about the end of the star chart, but you could just use the regular Toxin melee mod, and you're going to be fine. Corrupt Charge is the only corrupted mod that is in any part of the build that can do Steel Path. And then Wise Razor, this has a consistent farm where you farm the little bots that follow Exploiter around in the open world. Because you can just like reload that area over and over and then go get them. For me personally, it took about 2 hours to farm on the free to play through, but that is that is a statistical outlier. This is a very common, actually very easy mod to get statistically, but it could take you a while if you are as lucky or unlucky, I guess, as me. But that too is actually very unlikely. So, what can the new player version of this build that doesn't require reactors or catalysts or Forma or any of that shit, what can it do? Well, the answer is whatever it wants. We have the new player build on there and the new player build on here, and we are just going to go ahead and just do a little bit of level 200 Steel Path Corrupted Heavy Gunners. Just a couple of them. Just why not? Like, these guys most assuredly aren't a threat. That would be crazy. Like, why would they be a problem? How did you take 0? I must have missed you with my 3. Kind of being ragdolled around by Death Cube here. But yeah, that's what the poverty build on KULLERVO does. The no investment babies first build version of KULLERVO does that. It does not care about anything. This build can kill Acolytes, although it will take a couple of swings. And it is just generally not a problem. The biggest issue you're going to have is that you'll have to cast your 2 pretty often. But you're going to have energy because this build includes Hunter Adrenaline, and you are survivable enough that like enemies on Steel Path, especially before they hit level 200, really aren't going to be able to kill you. Like, it's usually just not going to happen outside of Eximus waves that could probably knock you around a bit. So, yeah, if you're looking for an entryway into Steel Path and making those missions much simpler, KULLERVO's your guy. It takes roughly, like, 4 to 5 hours in grand total to farm both him and the Azathane. And it's not difficult. It is very accessible to new players. Like I said, I did it in the recent free-to-play through. I do plan to make a separate video on how to do that whole farm, very specifically. But yeah, he's kind of phenomenal. He kind of has no real issues with much. The only thing that can really set him back sometimes, and definitely not if you have this build, is that he does need enemies that can be hit by his 2 in order to heal and generate Overguard. But that's almost never a problem. Most enemies can fill that in for him. So unless you're fighting like Steel Path Kella Defame or something, it's on. And even and then there's the rollers and such. So I think that actually doesn't count either. There's very limited situations where the build for him does not work. Also, other things on him, he can use the Grimoire pretty well. If you want to use like Grimoire buffs on him, if you're like a new player, that's great. And then like the Nataruk is also like a fine weapon. If you're just like kind of min-specking out what you want for him. Obviously, you could use all of like the really good, like grab like the Torrid Incarnate and the Furus Incarnate and all the stuff like that and combine that with Collective Curse and just do all the things with him while having Storm of Ukko down and just like killing all the enemies. You could do all these things, but the fact of the matter is that you just don't need to. In fact, for the Steel Path test that we do, let's just use the new player build. Like, I mean, you guys can use like the full investment build and to fuck around and indeed make enemies find out. But let's just use the no investment thing and just take this into Steel Path for a while and just show it off. I will have my Death Cube, and of course keep in mind that I do have shards on him, so this is one singular copy of Intensify worth of strength, and a little bit of energy on top. But generally speaking, I don't think that's going to particularly matter. And you could pretend you put a reactor in him and one copy of Intensify, I guess, if you really gotta. But yeah, let's jump into Steel Path on the Poverty build and just have some fun. All right, let's go Poverty mode, boys. But yeah, KULLERVO, really huge glow up from his initial release. I mean, it wasn't that bad. Like, he was obviously like a serviceable enough Warframe that just had a couple issues. But those issues at this point are quite fixed. He is quite a powerhouse at this point, that I don't think is going to really have any issues going forward, at least not for the foreseeable future, at the very least. Yeah, so like this, we'll throw our 4 down, send it that way, get our crits. Those guys are all dead, and just freeform casting, just, you know, just doing what we want to do. Like, I know that this looks like a lot of Warframes like full build, which is kind of my point with KULLERVO, honestly. Also, don't forget that his one is a teleport. Like, it's an actual teleport, so it's actually really good for doing like spy missions and stuff. So that is also definitely a big consideration. If you need a Warframe that's like, hey, what if I was good at like actually everything? KULLERVO's the boy. Hey, we got 8 mods. Adorable. At least you know I'm not like doing a million runs until one of these works. I'm actually like playing the super suboptimally too. I'm like just trying to make his one like, because sometimes his one like won't connect the heavy, but it's like it's never really a big deal. Because like you get the buff just from teleporting, so you never actually have to have his one do its like full follow through. So it's not really a big deal. You just have to press 1 and then you will get the thing. The biggest thing you have to do is make sure that you press 2 every once in a while just to freshen up that there overguard. Overguard also, of course, is the status immunity, so that's also quite nice. And it's going to keep you very, very healthy. Yeah, see a group of enemies, chain them all together, and just make them all feel each other's pain. Just death. Just straight death in the halls. Luckily, like, his 2 was changed to the point where you were actually invincible on cast for a moment. So you have some freedom with, like, if you notice it breaks, because there is, like, a little tell for it, you actually can, like, instant cast it on reaction, which is very nice. Very Nezha-ish of the way that he is now. But yeah, KULLERVO is certainly the best Warframe that we have gotten in recent memory. Of course, post his changes. But yeah, he is really, really very phenomenal. You see, like, even the Xmas enemies, like, can't really handle this. Obviously, like, the really tough Xmas, not really the tough Xmas, because You know, toughness actually isn't that much variety in terms of how strong they are. But in terms of the Eximus that have like the floor attack, like for like the big fire wave, those guys can give you some trouble because they will usually just like pop your entire overguard with the new player build anyway, all at once. So those guys, you got to kind of watch out for them. And you know, there's a little baby learning curve there, but it is also a little baby build. It is near guaranteed, especially because Tuviri gives you quite a few reactors. It's pretty unlikely that this crazy low-level build will ever actually seriously be used by someone at this level. This is really more for just showing off how good KULLERVO is. It's the reason why I'm doing it. Because I can. Like, I can and he can. And, like, it's a short list. It's a short list of frames with, like, the privilege to tear up Steel Path on this, like, low amount of a build. Like, honestly. There's Malice. You can see how much he doesn't like being hit by KULLERVO's 1. Yeah, so, you know, no real problems there. See, our kill rate is about 400 in 4 minutes on the 4 babies build. And if this doesn't, I mean, this one should really put into perspective the difference between some frames. Like, there's a number of Warframes where they're full investment and they have trouble doing what I'm doing on KULLERVO right now with no investment whatsoever. So it is, yeah, it's kind of a whole thing. Like I really want to stress very hard that I'm not even using a fully leveled Vitality. Like, there's not a corrupted mod in this build. I mean, this build doesn't even contain the Umbral mods, which by the time you're at Steel Path, you have to have obtained. You objectively will have them. And they'll be partially leveled, too. Like, if I was to do, like, a run through Warframe where, like, I wasn't allowed to spend Endo, I would probably still be KULLERVO. Because he just, like, you know, you slap, like, just the Umbral mods on him and some, like, hyper basic other stuff. And he's doing this. And like I said, I'm kind of goofing around. Like, I'm not 100% goofing around. But I am about 40% goofing around. And, like, the fact of the matter is that, like, he's got a, like, fantastic survivability that, like, scales very well with the way that Overguard works now, and, like, well, the way that his Overguard specifically works as well. His 1 is an amazing damage buff that can get him a lot of places against single targets. His 3 can take that damage buff and spread it to enemies in a relatively large area, even with just the base form of the ability. And his 4 is a very solid AoE that you can use for farming low-level missions, and with, like, a full build, you can even farm up to, like, Steel Path stuff for regular dudes. Obviously not so much, like, Eximi and such, but, like, that's a lot. Like, other Warframes that have come out recently, you look at them and they just, like, have at least one problem. Like Gyre, for example. Her damage just isn't enough without an armor strip. Meanwhile, KULLERVO, he's one of the Warframes without an armor strip that he don't need one. If he had an armor strip, I don't know that he'd bother using it. Honestly. Like, you could make one of his abilities strip armor, but, like, what am I going to use it on? Like, exactly Kuvalich's? I guess? Because Kuvalich's, I mean, honestly, maybe not even Kuvalich's, really. Probably just use my 1 with a reasonable build as opposed to hardly a build, and that would take care of that pretty simply. Big old fire wave, boys. Yeah, we can just set these, like, with just setting up the Xmas, like, in Steel Path for finishers really, really easily. That, by the way, remains, like, a really nice thing for new players. It's really not a thing at all for experienced players to be ever casting that. or casting that, using those finishers. Like, I do it as a goof on, like, you know, the main account. But like, it's really useful for like whenever you're getting into Steel Path, especially on the Xmas. It's actually quite nice. I wish it was integrated a little better into the whole of the game to be like, you know, more of a core mechanic as opposed to kind of a low level only thing, but it is what it is. But yeah, I think I'm not even buffed. Yeah, I'm not even buffed, and I'm just using the Azothain because it's quite good too. You can see like the like with the energy I've built up here. Obviously, a little bit of this with like the couple of blue shards that I have, but I do use regular flow on the poverty build. And I wouldn't drop regular flow on the poverty build. It's real nice. Regular flow plus Hunter Adrenaline or Rage if you, for whatever reason, have Rage instead of Hunter Adrenaline. Even like Hunter Adrenaline is better and more common, so you know, apples, potatoes, or whatever. Yeah, like whatever you got, like that combination on KULLERVO, because he's an all health Warframe. Well, under the Overguard, I suppose. Is just really, really great energy economy that is not high investment at all. He's one of like the few Warframes where like you don't need like fleeting early on. Mania's dead, and like this is a gateway, right? Like the this is nothing. Like there's Warframes that don't need much, right? Like I've talked about on like the last free to play through before my most recent one. I use Zephyr. Zephyr is a phenomenal way to get into Steel Path, and she really doesn't need much of a build. But I mean, I would still at least want a reactor on her before I take her to Steel Path, which I think is a pretty reasonable ask of a build if you're taking them to, you know, ostensibly the hardest content that players are going to be doing. But this build doesn't even ask for that. And like enemies like these dudes, these guys can be like, you know, they're status immune, so you have to deal raw to them. But like, it's really not bad. Probably do this. There you go. Yeah, chain him against a bunch of other guys and make pretty simple work of him. But yeah, kill rate on that is 929 on the poverty build in 10 minutes. I mean, I would, like, honestly challenge someone to find a Warframe that is better on less. Like, this is a weapon that is farmed alongside the frame. And, like, you can't, like, for the primary component for the Azothain, it's worth noting, you actually cannot not get the clamps required to get the Azothain. While you're getting KULLERVO. You actually can't do it without getting most of the like difficult to acquire materials for the Azothain. It's just ridiculous. It's so accessible and so good. If you're a new player, build KULLERVO. If you're not a new player, build KULLERVO. Like, he's fantastic for so many things. Honestly, probably one of my favorite frames just in the game at this point. But yeah, that's what's going on with KULLERVO now. He got a real nice glow up after his initial release. All right, thanks for watching, everyone, and of course, as usual, thanks very much to the patrons for supporting the channel, especially the $10 patrons: Alex Barnum, Andrew, Angel SBM, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Blotomatic, Brandon Coggin, Brutus Salazar, Canolathra, Dylan Dworsky, Thrain, Afon, James Hartshorn, GC4 Science, John Lobdell, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Bigoko, Minty Ginja, Michta, Nerve, Ramox to date, Ruby, Sharp247, Tamrielic Wastelander, the Coupon of Death, Homeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars Wadded, and Zeraphir. And of course, thank you very much to all of the $5 and $2 patrons as well. It is much appreciated because I've been asked this a lot. I am doing the 2024 Warframe tier list, but I need to get last year's data from whenever DE releases that, which hopefully happens on the January dev stream. But that's what's holding that up, because, you know, that kind of factors into Warframe's getting S ranks or not. But yeah, that's what's going on. And thanks. Thank you, everybody.